Hello and welcome. Welcome to our third webinar in this during this pandemic. We are focusing today on local governments and local deals and how the municipalities and governments are planning on getting development back on track and opening back up for business. I'm Shannon Sclafani. I'm head of the Michigan District Council of the Urban Land Institute. On behalf of ULI, I would like to welcome you to this webinar and express how much we all hope that you are well and safe during this unprecedented time. I hope that this call will go smoothly, but also hope you will forgive us any hiccups that may occur as we learn to use this technology in a more expanded capacity than we have before. We have already set the default for all of you to be muted for the majority of this meeting, and we ask that you also disable your video for the duration of the presentations in order to ensure that we have proper bandwidth. This meeting's presentation is being recorded, and we will share the presentation on our website soon after. In just a few moments, I will turn it over to our speakers to start, but want to share the format of this meeting to ensure that we can maximize everyone's time. Victoria will be monitoring the chat for questions that you may have throughout the presentations. We have reserved the last third of the meeting for a robust question and answer session with our speakers and with each other. Please allow Victoria to call on you to unmute and ask your question during that time. However, we know that you are all problem solvers and you are dedicated to doing all you can to help prevent the spread of the virus, to navigate the business and planning impacts, and to help mitigate the impact of this crisis on communities and vulnerable people. Please feel free to jump in on the chat and provide answers or resources that you are aware of. Our members are our greatest resource, and we know that you are working to help cities and communities navigate the pandemic and rebuild after it in ways that foster social equity and provide opportunities for all. With that, I will turn it over to the co-chair of our district council, Dan Cassidy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Another beautiful day here in Michigan. At least sun's shining. I know some folks a little further north of us are dealing with some water these days, so hopefully you're all safe and handling that well. So we're pretty excited once again to deliver another webinar on a topic very relevant to the current crisis. Just wanted to remind you all that our plan is to continue to provide these webinars every 2 weeks. We're trying to keep content coming to you so we stay connected and provide you the benefits that you're used to enjoying from ULI Michigan. Obviously, we're challenged with the quarantine still going on or the stay-at-homes, but we're hoping these webinars provide just one little way to keep it connected and keep really relevant content coming your way. And today's gonna be no exception, so we're excited for that. Also, if you have any ideas for future topics, please send them in to Shannon, Victoria, or Carissa. We're taking ideas and we're looking to keep content coming out. Obviously, with webinars coming every 2 weeks, we need more ideas. Also, when the first screen on this webinar popped up there was a link at the bottom of the screen to ULI Michigan's website. And if you don't already have that, just put it in your Google browser. There it is. Click on that link or copy that link into your browser, follow it. In there, there'll be a list of our upcoming ULI Michigan webinars. And there's also a number of the national webinars listed in there too, all linked. And those are also some really good programs. So I encourage you to check those out. So thank you for coming today. Enjoy the content here, and I'll turn it over to Jen.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Jen Rigtrink with the Michigan Municipal League. I am part of our state and federal affairs team. I handle all of our legislative issues for economic development, land use, so planning and zoning, and a variety of our municipal issues. One of which I'm dealing with right now, liquor issues and trying to get restaurants and bars and our municipalities working hand in hand in outdoor seating spaces. So Happy to participate with you today. I just wanted to chat for a quick minute here and give kind of a statewide perspective of what's going on. You know, our members are number one, trying to protect the health and safety of their citizens and staff. That's their number one priority right now. So if you are reaching out to them to see where a project is, please have patience with them. I know they are trying to juggle the capacity of the pandemic that's going on, you know, working on reopening plans, making sure that they are going to have proper PPE for their staff to get things going again. And so, you know, they're really focused on those critical issues that they're dealing with right in front of them at the moment. To kind of give a statewide perspective, as many of you are probably aware, the governor just issued two new EOs on Monday, 2020-92 and 2020-91. 91 is dealing with specifically worker protections, and that worker protections really apply to any employer. So whether you're a municipal employer, you're a retail or restaurant establishment, you're a construction or any other kind of industry business. And then 2020-92 was part of the MySafe Start plan that's opening up regions 8 and 6, which is the entire UP, and then the other one is referred to as the Traverse City region, kind of Traverse City and above. And so those are really allowing for some openings of restaurants, 50% occupancy, reduced rates. I would like to just clarify one thing that was said in the press conference Monday and has been in some follow-up Q&A. Locals, really local, when you're talking about city, villages, and townships, really do not have the authority to tell a restaurant that they can only do outdoor dining. That would fall more at your local health department, which is usually the county department. You know, the city of Detroit does have a public health department, but in most communities, you're going to be at the county level there. Locals can zone around, you know, sidewalk permits and outdoor things. But just to clarify with those EOs, we do not feel our members were granted any new power to regulate a restaurant to say that it can only do outdoor seating. You know, we are spending a lot of time at the league working at the federal level because really everyone I'm sure is aware, has heard about our multi-billion-dollar, you know, shortfall when it comes to state revenue, and that's going to hit our municipalities are already struggling. They have been struggling because of our broken municipal finance system in the state, but that is going to be a crunch. And so, you know, the speakers today are going to walk us through kind of what is the new normal. What are some temporary things that could turn into long-term fixes? How are they trying to get projects moving again? You know, and how does that mean for incentives, local incentives going forward? I know a lot of folks like to use local tax abatements, but if those taxes aren't there to be able for the locals to capture, they might not be able to abate them either. So the only other EO I was going to mention really quickly was 2020-75. That extended the ability for municipalities to hold virtual meetings until June 30th. We at the league are working with the legislature and with the governor's office, hoping to in some way extend that further for those that are of vulnerable populations that probably aren't going to be comfortable, whether it's staff, the public, in public meetings, you know, in any time in the near future. So we are hoping to be able to continue that for certain populations, even when we get back to regular in-person meetings. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Duffy. I'm a planner at Smith Group in Ann Arbor. I have worked for the last 10 years in the metro area primarily, but across the state and region as a planning consultant. So my perspective my perspective comes from helping a variety of communities, scales and sizes. Part of what Jennifer said, you know, dealing with different communities across the state, each are responding a little bit differently, but we have some commonalities between them. And we're seeing some shared resources emerge, but I think overall everything's going to vary based on the municipality. So hopefully when Elizabeth and Katie share later, they'll give you kind of that spectrum from small up to large cities. I think it's important to note that while construction has been allowed to restart, a lot has been going on during all of this. So while it may feel like things have been stalled and stopped, a lot of municipalities are already working on things. They have been, like the rest of us, working from home and having a variety of different challenges that they face while they're working from home. And the trickle of work as it comes in and projects and reviews has varied across the board. Some communities have completely shut down their township halls, let's say, while others have had some service available for emergencies and keeping public safety open. But I think one of the key things to realize is that each community is different and has a different level of union staff that has complicated things a little bit. So while I know in our office, we're able to, you know, lay people off or furlough people, you can't do that when they're union employees. So the job descriptions are shifting among everyone as they accommodate all this new normal of working from home and are shifting it back to work, much like the rest of us are exploring what's safe and having different parts of the office come back at different times. But many of the staff who already were wearing many hats, I'm sure many of you are municipal staff on the line, and are seeing their job descriptions change every day and having to do things they never thought they would have to do. So I think trying to remain calm and understanding that everyone's still trying to figure things out is a common theme among many of my colleagues and clients. And access to technology too. So some have waited and not had any meetings and just tried to ride this out until they can meet in person again. And I think hearing from Jen that they're extending the virtual meeting until the end of June is great, but most places I don't think are still going to be ready to have that. So it's good to hear they're working on extending that even longer, because a lot of the smaller communities don't have the technological capacity. A lot of us have been thrust into this digital world. We were already familiar with it. But I think depending on the board's makeups, age, experience level, everything has made that adaptability different. And we're going to continue to see how that evolves. And I think when it comes to the human touch of much of the development process, where you can come up to the counter and meet with someone, obviously that's not there. So a lot of phone calls and gradually getting back into working hand in hand with developers and folks. I think there's been a bit of a disconnect there, but I think all of my clients that I've spoken with, yeah. So Victoria, are there slides being shown right now? Because I can't see them. I'm on my iPad because I don't have a computer. Okay, so we're still on the work from home slide. Let's just stay there. We can switch. I'll say next slide next. I just see myself, so low technology for me today. I think that some of the things that communities have been taking advantage of is they've already been part of the Redevelopment Ready Communities program. So the next slide here, streamlining the process. I think we're seeing that the communities that were already engaged with the MEDC's RRC program are seeing some efficiencies from having a lot of their stuff shifting to be online, but different communities don't have that capability, or the people reviewing the plans don't have the technology to actually mark up the drawings and still need paper copies and things. So all of that has really shifted depending on how technologically advanced they are. But I think that a lot of people are realizing they need to make up some lost time, trying to find efficiencies in the permitting process, the inspection process, while keeping everybody safe, of course. I think when it comes to zoning and some of these outdoor seating things and any ordinance that's going to have to change, I think that's where we're going to see the lag. I think a lot of communities have been trying to anticipate what is going to be the next thing that they need to amend and how they can be creative and do temporary things. But when it comes to ordinances and things like that, there's a process that they're going to have to go through in order to rush along zoning changes is going to be tricky. So I think part of that is related as well to just people not being unsure and uncertain. And so while we all may be ready to get back to work and building things, I think some cities have to really be very cautious in how fast they accommodate changes. So let's go to the next slide. Let's talk just briefly. I'm just kind of setting the stage here with some topics that kind of relate to the issues at hand. And then when I hand it over to Elizabeth and Katie, they'll give more specifics. So other themes across municipalities in the state, we're seeing the key to keeping equitable during this time. It's very challenging when we're all aware of the inequities that exist across the spectrum, from how badly the disease is hitting them and their families and their neighbors, to what kind of job you have. You have a level of privilege that, you know, allows me to work from home, but that doesn't mean that other people, you know, are forced to go into work because they're in critical positions. So I think when it comes to planning and zoning and development, trying to strike that balance between what's legal and the executive order and navigating that, and also trying to figure out what's enough. What is enough public involvement? How do we know that we've heard from everyone when we're in this new world that we're not used to counting interactions digitally? So a lot of places have put off the big public hearings, hoping that they can hold some hybrid version of those at least in the future. But some aging members on many of those boards are not willing to come in. Rightly so. They don't want to take their health, risk their health by going in for a meeting. So I think that some of finding ways to expedite the review process a bit, streamline it, so that you don't have to have as many big public hearings. But then the flip side of that is having people not be part of the process and whose voices aren't we hearing. So just one quick note, I think that as we assume what the engagement spectrum is like, having people use their phones for things. I'm finding today with my computer not working, balancing an iPad, a cell phone, and an ancient desktop computer from college, that like I have to have multiple devices to participate today, where some people, all they have is a phone, and that's very limiting, and they may not have good access to broadband or Wi-Fi, or the ability to even know how to use it. Like my grandmother doesn't know how to use her phone. So I think there's a wide range of spectrum of issues that come along with this, that while most people do have smartphones these days, it disproportionately affects those people that were already vulnerable ahead of this. Another quick thing, Traverse City has started doing this. Ann Arbor's looking at this, how to rethink our public space and spacing requirements and opening up streets. So when it comes to curbside management, letting people have more space and have that spill out into the street. You're going to be hearing a bit about some of that later on, and trying to rethink some of that. Again, that all comes down to, again, this next slide here on staying safe, making sure that we are able to do everything and make these changes while not compromising the health of staff or the public. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Kathleen, and thank you everyone for participating today. And my name is Elizabeth Hewd, and I am the Community Development Director for the City of Mason. And I love this field, and so for the last 20 or so years, I've had the opportunity to work in a variety of capacities with local, regional, and state and federal agencies on regulatory work with land use, transportation, arts and culture. So I've just enjoyed working on this. You know, Kathleen really kind of set things up. Our role in the City of Mason, we're sort of a small rural community. So some of the things that we talk about or that are challenges for us may not necessarily be an issue for other communities, especially larger ones. And if we want to go ahead and move to the next slide, I'll go through. So really right now, when it comes to building permits, we used our time during the shutdown very wisely to we had planned to take a year to get our online building permit system in place. we went ahead and expedited that in 6 weeks because we knew that that was going to be a priority for our customers, that we needed to have that option for people to go online. And so that was something that we focused on. One of the things I also want to touch on with our permits is that something that's very important to us is that getting our businesses and getting our developers through the permit approval process is one of our most important economic development strategies. Time is money, and so we want to make sure that we are communicating clearly up front and helping to manage expectations so that we're sort of reducing the amount of time that has to be spent back and forth answering questions. So along with the online permitting system, we also went through our building permit forms and looked at the language that we were using and just said, you know, how can we make it easier for people to navigate this? What we're finding with our customers, again, in a smaller community, is that more and more people are taking the do-it-yourself approach. So we don't have contractors and attorneys coming in and filling out paperwork. We have a business owner that is, you know, a smash hit when it comes to selling, you know, cheese or clothing, but they don't necessarily understand the permit regulatory process. So we're just really trying to make sure that the language that we use and that our forms and the questions that we ask are fairly, you know, it's easier for them to kind of understand what they need to provide for us. So with building permits, again, that's our most, the highest volume that we deal with day to day. I'm very fortunate our building official lives in the city. So we have a very, very high tech system where I take the physical building permits and I put them in a box outside of his front door once or twice a week. But we have a great system to get that work done. Zoning permits, we are right now looking at capacity issues. We have always used technology and email distribution for packets. And I've surveyed my planning commissioners, and you know, I understand that they're all available to participate, but what we're finding is that I need my other team members, my other departments to participate in that development review process. So we probably will take a little bit longer to get back up to speed on the zoning permits, just so that we can provide that service thoroughly. So we're still evaluating that. We've got some changes coming with our schedule, and we're trying to evaluate how we can move those forward. But I'm still available to answer questions and meet with them. In terms of just focusing on what we see coming with the reopening, and you know, we're sort of watching our northern cousins go through right now. I actually was on the phone with Traverse City just a few minutes before the session, but we're looking at, you know, how can we utilize parking to provide outdoor space for, you know, restaurants and retail. So, you know, just kind of going through trying to pre-approve some locations in public spaces for our public restaurants, and then looking at our ordinances and saying, okay, you know, what do we need to do here to make sure that a business can administratively get approved to, you know, use 10 parking spaces for an outdoor seating area, and how do we make that work so it's very easy to get through. Just going through technical review and inspections, making sure that our team is on board and that they know that, you know, we really want to expedite these permits quickly. You know, speaking with the building official and your fire inspector is really important, because we may be able to modify our zoning requirements, but there's still the state construction code. There's still certain requirements for certificate of occupancy and outdoor spaces that, you know, we need to make sure we're following that. But is there a way to align those so that they go through one permit process and they check all the boxes? So looking at ways we can shorten that. And then also just in terms of approval, making sure that if there is a way to allow staff to approve certain things administratively, that we put the mechanisms in place to make that so that we're not asking people to go to city council to get approval, you know, planning commission over here. How can we make this an administrative process on a temporary basis and try it out? And if it works well, then we look at a long-term solution. And then the only other thing I want to say with our parking to patio theme in our downtown areas where we have limited parking and we might be using parking areas for outdoor seating, providing our customers a resource to say, okay, I can't park right next to the door this time, but a block away, there's a parking spot that I can use, and it's, you know, a nice little walk. It's a nice downtown. So just making sure that we're providing tools for maps and detour routes if we do decide to close streets and have those spaces available. So so that's sort of what we're focusing on right now in Mason.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Trudeau. I'm the Deputy Director of the City of Detroit's Planning and Development Department. In that capacity, I work with the city's approximately 30 urban planners, urban designers, landscape architects around permitting of a development, historic preservation approvals, zoning, as well as a number of neighborhood planning initiatives. I've also got experience working in the mayor's office previous to this, and also in the housing and revitalization department at the city. So have stayed in very close contact with both of those other departments during the last 2 months of this remote working situation. I would say that in the city of Detroit, we're kind of taking, a lot of us have been focused on recovery for the last couple of months. Response. A lot of people, as Kathleen mentioned, people are having to do jobs that they never expected to do. A lot of us have been redeployed on response jobs, and really now starting to take a look towards the recovery of the city, recovery of neighborhoods, recovery of the economy, and looking at a lot of the same things that Elizabeth just mentioned to have that recovery response while also doing it safely. I would say that there's been sort of 2 broad prongs to the way we're looking at getting development back up to speed. It's one, making sure that the city of Detroit has lost a substantial amount of revenue during this time. Looking to make sure that we're leveraging every single dollar we possibly can from the federal stimulus acts to make sure that dollars continue to flow into our ecosystem. But also, again, like others have already stated, trying to streamline permitting processes, making sure, looking where we can legally streamline things, use zoning in ways that are legal. Just because of executive orders, it doesn't necessarily change the way we can do everything. There are still certain limitations to the way we can do things from a legal standpoint or a state legislative standpoint. So making sure that we're doing everything within those confines, but definitely trying to push boundaries as much as legally possible. We are also looking at supporting restaurants and businesses by helping them move out into public right-of-ways, into sidewalks, into streets. In Detroit, we're fortunate that we've recently built a couple of brand new streetscape projects that were designed to close the streets and allow for a shared street model. We're going to leverage those to the fullest extent possible. And then I would just say that we are really taking a sort of phased approach to trying to get things back open. We've been very focused in the last 4 to 5 weeks about getting City Hall open again. As was previously mentioned, a lot of us we work at counters and have to work with the public. We are physically retrofitting the spaces in our offices, installing plexiglass barriers, ordering PPE and hand sanitizer, figuring out ways to make it so that people don't need to open doors anymore. Just the smallest detail we're having to pay attention to, and we're actually doing it all in consultation with the City of Detroit's public health department, as well as medical doctors. The mayor has actually brought a medical doctor onto the team temporarily who's advising us on all of these things. So that's been really our first focus. Now we're really also focused on supporting businesses getting back to work safely. We've been working a lot with the corporate community to get donations of PPE, and we hope to, those have really been going to first responders for the last few months, part of that response activity that I was describing before. But as we look towards recovery, how can we get more of those donations of PPE to go to business owners so that they can be, not only are they safely operating their businesses, but the residents that utilize those businesses are safe as well. And then another big thing that I've been on a lot of national calls that planning organizations, cities everywhere are dealing with is community engagement. Is how do you engage with residents remotely given limitations in technology? One thing that we've been grappling with in Detroit is what type of engagement counts during this time. Is if we are holding we have managed to move some of our public approvals meetings to Zoom video conference. We've now had two historic district commission meetings via Zoom. We feel that those have been pretty successful, but how long are residents going to feel comfortable with that format as we move beyond this time where this feels like more of an emergency? How are we going to, we have put a temporary pause on engaging on things like design and decision making around park design and bike lanes and street design out of respect for the community and the public health crisis that they're dealing with, but we're not going to be able to do that for much longer. So the Planning and Development Department is actually, by the end of this week, going to publish a set of guidelines on our website for the various tools and ways in which we can try to recreate that type of engagement in a virtual setting. I would just say, also, we are also trying to take some significant packages to our city council to allow for some, at least for a temporary period of time, allow for staff approvals. A lot of our, down to the finest detail of a sidewalk cafe in Detroit, you need city council approval for those. And we're going to try to see what we can do about requesting some staff approvals of things like that for the time being. We don't know if we'll have success. We're just starting to work that out in anticipation of the governor's changing executive orders, but we're optimistic, and we're going to work hard to try to make sure that these things come back as quickly as possible and as safely as possible.
Are there any questions that we want to go through specifically before we open it up to the full chat?
And some of the things that you both have talked about, streamlining or doing, temporarily right, are good practices that long-term can be adopted and continue on.
One thing that I actually intended to mention in my remarks is that I have noticed with all of the things that I've talked about, we are learning ways in which we can do our work better for the long term as a result of this. We've actually had a number of people, a lot of the concern about doing community engagement, for instance, in a remote fashion has been that we're missing people who don't have access to the right technology. There are a lot of people who have access to that technology but can't physically get to a meeting at City Hall or out in their community. And so we've actually been reaching a different audience that we weren't reaching before. And similarly with some of these right-of-way permit issues, these have been issues for Detroit for years. I'm sure people on some of the participants on the webinar have experienced this. And so we're hopeful that some of these, we'll be able to test some of these ideas out during this time, because it is an emergency and we really do need to be trying really new and innovative things to get back into a full level of operation. We're really hopeful that we'll be able to learn some things from that and adopt them permanently for the better of the community.
And I would support that. I would agree. That's exactly what this opportunity is about. We have a special event permit process, and one of the things that's brought up is there's some language in our ordinance that needs to be cleaned up to sort of help expedite some of the permits. For instance, there's a paragraph that says something to the effect that under a special use permit, the Planning Commission could allow garage sales, and nobody's going to get a special use permit for a garage sale. So, we're trying to clean that up. But our special event process really is a streamlined, all-in-one. Police, DPW, everybody signs off on that. So I'm hoping that's a model that we can kind of really move forward through this.
Okay. It looks like we may have gotten a question in the chat.
Yeah, Bali, do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question?
So the question was about cities, townships, and counties working together during this time. I think that we've definitely seen struggles across the state in the past with some folks being territorial, but I do think that I've heard a number of, I live in Oakland County, so speaking to that specifically, I know that the county has been very proactive at partnering with some of the local municipal governments, especially during this crisis time, in terms of disseminating, relief in terms of food and safety and all that kind of thing. But I do know a couple of communities where they're struggling, but still trying to get through on some site plans that were kind of crossing legislative boundaries. And so one community is moving a little bit faster than the other. And I'd say prior to the crisis, it was a challenge, and it's even more of a challenge now because everyone's response is a little different. But I do think it depends on what county you're in and how strong of a county it is. I think Oakland's pretty been more aggressive on the I know at one point they were flying pilots down to Indiana to fly us in supplies to hospitals in Oakland County. So I think there's a little bit of each man for himself, which is maybe not the greatest. I don't know if anyone else has seen any partnerships with other communities.
Well, I can talk just briefly from the association level. I mean, the Michigan Municipal League, we work very closely with the Michigan Township Association and the Michigan Association of Counties in trying to, you know, bring lines of communication to our members and hear the issues and scenarios that they're and the questions, and then trying to be able to answer those and answer them in a consistent manner to the best of our ability. And honestly, so we're not working against each other, that we're all trying to work with each other during this time.
Do you want, so I know one of the questions came through an email for before this meeting was about the CARES Act and funding, and how if you've already started to strategize about how that money is going to be spent at the sort of city levels, or if we're still waiting on more direction from the governor at this point.
So Katie can talk specifically about Detroit, but the first round of CARES Act funding only went to local government that had a population of 500,000 or more, or counties. So in Michigan, that meant Detroit got an allocation, Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, and I believe Kent County, and then the rest went to the state. And so the league, we are still actively involved in conversations with the state budget office and trying to advocate for that funding to be spent for local government, for all local government. And so we're still waiting exactly and how that will be allocated from the state to what, you know, because the state is also having lots of costs and a gaping hole in their budget as well. And then, you know, we're actively advocating for any other funding, whether it's the HEROES Act, the SMART Act. You know, it's not necessarily that one act or another at the federal level the league is going behind because of X, Y, and Z. We're just advocating that funding come to local units of government to help them with the costs associated with this pandemic.
Jennifer's right. The city of Detroit has already gotten an allocation of community development block grants, COVID special funding of about almost $21 million. We've also gotten an allocation already of about $10 million of emergency services grant for homelessness. That money, there is a strategy in place. Some of it's already been deployed, but primarily that first tranche of funding is going to go to a lot of the emergency response activity that we're still grappling with. So rental assistance, eviction prevention, those types of things. There's a second $2 billion discretionary tranche of CDBG that HUD has not yet awarded, that is going to get awarded by via formula that Secretary Carson, we've heard is still finalizing. Detroit's been advocating pretty hard for that formula to be beneficial to cities in Michigan that have similar demographic and have had similar issues with the transmission of the virus as Detroit. And so we're hopeful that Detroit and hopefully some of the other cities that have had a similar situation with us around the spread of transmission of the virus will benefit from a significant amount of that. It's a $2 billion of discretionary CDBG COVID that has yet to be awarded.
And CDBG at the state level, I can't speak for the MEDC. So if there's someone actually on the line that can, unmute yourself. But I can tell you in the most recent conversations I've had with the MEDC and CDBG specific staff is that they're still waiting for that first round of allocation to actually be released. And once they know when they're going to have that funding, then they will put out their requests for non-entitlement communities who didn't receive anything directly from HUD to be able to apply for that funding. I know they did amend the state consolidated plan to make sure that they were covering all eligible activities and things that you can cover with CDBG to be all encompassing, one of those being public services. In the past, they haven't funded public services with to the non-entitlements, and so that was one thing I know they did change. But again, the last I knew, they were still waiting to actually know when they were going to receive that funding to then release kind of their timeline and applications to apply for that money.
Wonderful. One of my questions is for the small business owners in your cities. How are you approaching sort of getting them sort of phased back in at the city level? Are you thinking about any additional strategies for that beyond just what the sort of state and federal governments are approaching?
I'm not sure if you're talking about, well, what I'll offer is that our city manager, Deb Stewart, has been leading the DDA, and they recently agreed to do a match program. So they launched a recent gift certificate program where they sold a certain number of gift certificates, and the DDA provided a match for those businesses. And that was one way where, we know that our businesses are hurting right now and they're still waiting to reopen. They're doing the best they can with curbside service and pickup and online deliveries. But that was a strategy to at least help those businesses in the DDA sort of hold on and build some support for them so that when they do reopen, so that they're able to reopen, so they're able to stay in business a little bit longer to get there. So.
The city of Detroit just released on Monday a guide, a campaign actually called Detroit Means Business. And with this campaign, we have published a guidebook of safety protocols for safely reopening businesses. And this gets down to a fairly technical level around structures. Businesses and
I think you're freezing up on us a little bit, Katie. We're only catching every third or fourth word. But yes, Detroit Means Business. I'm only going to sort of speak on that. The mayor outlined some of that pretty well in a press conference. Oh, Katie's unfrozen now. Earlier this afternoon, and I think that it's available online for people to view.
So one thing the league has been working on with the Liquor Control Commission, as well as the Restaurant and Lodging Association and the Licensed Beverage Association, is again on how do we allow restaurants and bars to go outside and utilize the outdoor space for social distancing and to help with, they're going to be facing occupancy restrictions for indoor spaces. So that's something we have been working on. There was a bill just introduced yesterday by Rep. Weber, 5781, that actually would allow a municipality, if they so choose, to establish a social district. And so the area would have to be adjacent to the business, but a patron would be able to purchase, say, liquor from that business and then be in this outdoor open area space. So of course that has to go through the legislative process. The Liquor Control Commission yesterday just announced a kind of an expedited process for their outdoor service area licensing. So there are multiple factors that are trying to go on. One thing with the locals that we have to be careful about is definitely our members. We're hearing about all kinds of creative things. The gift card program that Mason did, I mean, it sold out, I believe, in 6 or 7 hours. It was a smashing success. We have other communities that are getting ready to start programs like that. And then the MEDC recently, I think, loosened some restrictions on their Match on Main program to set up a donation-based program where a community could, you can go in and make a donation to businesses within their downtown district, and then the MEDC will match that based off of their, it's kind of modeled after the Public Spaces, Community Places program. So I think there are a lot of different things. We're also looking across the country at what other places are doing and how can we maybe incorporate those here, because I mean, our main streets, our downtowns are not going to be vital places if they don't have businesses that can stay in business.
I just typed a resource into the chat from a colleague who wrote a back to business, kind of back to brick and mortar guide. So that might complement what Katie was sharing about Detroit's guide.
And then Jennifer, I just also wanted to point out that, you know, this is one of those times where, you know, if we have artists or arts groups that can, you know, be creatively engaged to help us sort of, you know, do some creative guidelines for social distancing, creative signage or something. You know, our alleys downtown, we've invested in supporting the arts in those. So when those get converted to outdoor spaces, you know, you're not just looking at the dumpster and it's this alley. You know, there's some murals there. And so I think that was a really important investment that will help convert these public spaces outdoors into a, you know, a place, a real place, and we'll be able to make that transition a little bit easier.
So I know that a lot of you touched on sort of what you're doing and what you sort of legally can do and can't do as a township or as a municipality. And I'm just curious, since we likely have some developers and things like that on the call, if we could just spend sort of a moment talking through what sort of you can do as the municipality and what you can't do to get things back on track from a legal standpoint.
So at a very basic level, I think zoning still stands, municipal ordinances, codes, and policies still stand. I think lightening up some of the review processes, like Katie mentioned, you can find some wiggle room in zoning, but I think that we can't abandon all of our processes. They're there for a reason. So I think it's just adapting them a bit and trying to figure out what we can do. Like I mentioned, I think some things will require zoning ordinance amendments, and I would encourage communities to not be scared to make amendments that improve the process. You don't have to rewrite your entire zoning ordinance, but you can get some minor text amendments through that might be able to speed things up and have things codified so that they can go be approved administratively rather than things going to council. But I think legally, Jen can jump in on the, some of the alcohol and those kinds of boards that are at the state level for the Liquor Control Board. But I mean, we still have to follow building codes and inspections and all that sort of thing. So I think we just don't want to sacrifice safety. I don't know what other legal things besides zoning in my little world.
No, I agree. Kathleen, with everything you just said. I mean, when our members reach out with questions, we give them kind of the best case scenario, and then we always tell them you need to talk with your legal counsel, because that's the individual, or the, you know, they're the ones that, if there is a liability issue, are going to be representing you. And so you have to take their advice and follow their counsel. But with the Liquor Control Commission, technically nothing has changed yet. You know, they're talking about that streamlined process for outside, maybe taking a couple of steps out. So yeah, we're hoping to still see maybe further action on that, even at the state level, when it comes to requirements and inspections and things, and maybe allowing a local inspection for the outdoor seating, for outdoor liquor licenses, things like that. But that is all still to come.
Okay, we have a question from Damon. Damon, do you want to choose not to unmute? Okay, I just read the follow-up, the whole thing. So Damon asks, do municipalities and other economic development agencies expect to see the same amount of staff in the office after the pandemic subsides? Or are there plans for a ratio percentage of permanent work from home staff?
So in the communities that I spoke with, they don't think it's going to change too much. I think as we ramp back up, it'll come in phases, and there will be some people still working from home. But I think a lot of people still need to be in the office with so many customer-facing businesses or transactions that happen at a municipality. So they all do expect to go back, but I think, as with others in other industries, we're realizing, okay, we can mostly work from home. So I think the flexibility might be there. I haven't heard of anyone talking about cutting staff or anything. Like I said, the places I talk to, most staff is in a union, and so that limits that.
Yeah, and I would just add, from Mason's perspective, we have always been very conscious of focusing on critical services. And, you know, we don't have a big parks program. We don't have some of the special programs that the bigger cities do. So there's not much to cut. I will say, when we talk about the pandemic subsiding, a part of that equation is, you know, if kids are going to be back in school, one of the things we recognize is that we have employees that have children. I have a child, and he's not old enough to be by himself at home. So that is going to factor into how we manage schedules, and, you know, who works from home, and how that plays into it.
I would just add really quickly that in a city as large as Detroit, we've had to, I would say, along the theme of lessons learned, there are technological advances that we can make that will create efficiencies and actually probably be less expensive in the long run. And so I anticipate that while we may not be permanently working from home, there will be better technology to support us to work from home more in the future. So there could be, you could actually lever up certain services by having people be able to do consultation via Zoom as opposed to in person all the time. You may be actually able to do more of that type of customer service activity with improved technology, while still providing the same level of in-person service that we really, really value at the city.
And I would just add that, you know, right now, most of our members that have had to temporarily lay off or furlough employees, even at the state level, they're participating in the work share program. So, you know, on Mondays and Fridays, you may not be able to get a hold of someone and have to deal with them on other days. But realistically, going forward and facing the budget shortfalls that our communities in the state are facing, that yes, there could be less staff. There could turn into some permanent layoffs because of the budget shortfall. And that's just to come, but realistically, that could be happening in some of our communities across the state.
Thank you so much, ladies. Do we have any other final thoughts that you want to share?
I just want to thank you for including us today. And if anyone is interested, the League does have a coronavirus resource page where we have been trying to, we have a Q&A on there. So some of the questions that our members have may be questions they've gotten from, interacting with people trying to get projects moving in their communities again. We also have tried to start to put some best practices in there for other communities to look at. So if you're working with a community and they're wondering how to do something, we may have an idea on that page that another community is already doing. So just something to check out if you're interested.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Kathleen, Elizabeth, Jen, Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for sharing all of your insights and what you've been doing. I know that, everybody's going through a really challenging time right now. And so it's really helpful just to know that you are all sort of taking best practices, trying out new things, and really moving forward in a way that prioritizes the safety of our communities and our most vulnerable population. So I thank you guys for working so hard on that and really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thank you.
And we will hopefully see all of you again in 2 weeks, where we have a group of developers that will be having a discussion moderated by the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation to sort of discuss how they are also planning on getting their projects back on track. So we will see you all in 2 weeks. Stay safe and enjoy the break in the snow. Okay, wonderful. Have a great day, everyone.